Hey everyone, thanks for joining today's webinar from Real Story Group on the future of personalization. Exciting topic for us, and we've got a steamed panel here with our founder and CEO, Tony Byrne, along with our VP of Research and Advisory, Apoorv Durga. I am Scott Dill, Director of Business Development here with Real Story Group, and really excited for today's session. It's going to be 30 minutes, fast-paced, but we will as always, have time at the end for questions. So if you do have questions or anecdotes you want to share on this topic, feel free to enter those into the questions tab and to go to webinar control panel, and we'll get to those at the end of today's session. There will be a recording available within the next couple of days as well. So if you have to leave early or if you want to share this with your colleagues, you can do so within the next couple of days. To get started, just want to either introduce you to Real Story Group or give you a quick refresher if you haven't been in touch with us for a while. We call a different kind of analyst firm. So we don't take money from vendors or speak at their conferences or do any special favors for them. We're actually exclusively focused on sitting on your side of the table as you make these really important decisions on marketing technology. We've been at this for 25 years now, and we're really known as the toughest critics in this space. And we work with our customers in a variety of ways, but the majority of our customers are part of our exclusive staff leadership council. This is a group that meets quarterly in person and virtually, and just had a great meeting a couple of weeks ago in Houston. Have another meeting coming up in a few weeks on MarTech org model. So great time to learn more about the council, and if that's something you want to explore after today's session, just reach out to us and we'd be happy to dive into that further. But for now, let's hear from Tony and Apoorv on personalization. Guys, take it away.
Yeah, great. I'll start with just a preview of what we're going to cover here today. We're going to talk about why personalization still disappoints. I think that's one of the dirty little secrets about personalization, is that it has never really lived up to its hype, which doesn't mean you shouldn't invest in it, but there have been a lot of challenges around it. Of course, talking about the future, we're going to talk about what AI changes here. Then we'll spend the bulk of the session will be my colleague Apoorv talking about future personalization architecture, and then we'll wrap up with how to plan and evaluate this. The key word there really today is architecture. At the end of the day, almost all MarTech decisions start, they don't end, but they start with architecture. I think we've learned that much. And also, I think I'm foreshadowing here, we're going to be talking a lot about strategy, and in particular AI strategy, and maybe less so about tactics. And this is a really important distinction, particularly in the AI world, where you have a lot of tactical choices and feature-based opportunities, but the real value comes in obviously the strategic decisions that you make. And that's why we're going to focus a lot on architecture here. And just fair warning, you're going to see a lot of diagrams, but I think these diagrams are going to be rather different maybe from what you've seen before. So, okay, let's get into it. Personalization, particularly omnichannel personalization, which is really the challenge of the 2020s, post-pandemic, I would say, it's hard. And so we always start every conversation with what we describe as our MarTech services reference model. This is the B2B version. The B2C one isn't really actually that much different. You have engagement channels and interaction environments at the top, then a whole set of engagement services where many of us have been bulking up through the 2010s and early 2020s, and then a core set of enterprise foundation services that are really critical with respect to decoupling content and services and logic from these engagement services, so you can take a more omni-channel, a more efficient, more AI-ready kind of approach to this. And so this has been the journey that most of you have really been on for the past decade. AI is really accelerating this journey. But if we think about personalization, you'll notice there's no box here that actually says, personalization itself. The reality is that vendors have been building personalization subsystems into almost all of your MarTech platforms and all of your data platforms and your content platforms and everything else. So personalization, it's interesting, although most of us are not doing very much of it, it still is pervasive from kind of a feature standpoint. And so this makes it kind of beguiling because you feel like, well, it's right there, we should be doing more of it. But on the other hand, it's also problematic because the personalization is very channel specific. And so as you'll see in a moment, there's different tiers to personalization. You need content and data, and then you need some logic underneath it, and then you need the actual execution. And in many of these channels, you don't have the content and the data you need to effectively personalize. It's useful because the execution environment is right there. So, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be thinking about personalization or investing in it, or that there haven't been successful pilot projects. It's just that we haven't seen traditionally most pilot projects actually scale into a broader production, and in particular scale across channels, which is what you really want for a more customer-centric experience. So the question is then, how does AI change this, and does AI actually solve some of these long-standing challenges that we've all had with personalization? And definitely, I think what it does, and by the way, we could say this about AI more generally, is it kind of amps your existing architecture, but it's still, ironically, it makes it harder to do the kind of omni-channel global coordination that we'd all like to do. So to some extent, the advent of AI here is not actually being disruptive. If anything, it's kind of doubling down on the 2010s, which seems kind of ironic, but let's talk a little bit about what's happening here. So here again, where is AI in your stack? We would argue it should be a layer, but that's not the reality right now. The reality is that all these different vendors are injecting AI capabilities locally, very parochially, we would argue, into all these different channels. And so to the extent that AI is accelerating personalization efforts, it is once again doing that to some extent in channel. And so you run into all of the specific channel deficiencies around content and data, and the limited scope of that channel. So it basically, what's happening today, at least for the most part, although Apoorv is going to argue an alternative for this, for the most part, AI is kind of reiterating and reinforcing a legacy personalization architecture, right? So, does it do some interesting things for you within channels? Yeah, and web app inbound, you can have better real-time adaptation through AI, email and campaign, you can play around with subject titles, certainly guided responses in a service agent, content and creation, you can help maybe do some better derivative production, but they still have this question around, okay, we're kind of delegating all this locally, we're improving the way we can do personalization features within a particular channel, but does all this add up to a strategy? And does all this really add up to greater production, greater customer value, and better enterprise efficiency? And the answer here is quite possibly no. So what Apoorv is going to walk you through is what we would argue is a better personalization architecture. And a lot of this is about doing AI right. So there's no magic bullet here where somehow AI is going to transcend and help you leapfrog the traditional challenges around personalization, which is content, data, and context, and the fragility of rules and all these other sorts of things. But that AI, in the context of a proper AI architecture, which you should be building anyway, does offer some promise with respect to finally realizing some persistent and continuous value over personalization. So with that set up, hopefully you're really excited here. And Apoorv, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Tony. So think of the whole personalization as a layered challenge, right? So this is a useful way to think about why personalization has been so hard. It has always been layered. So at the bottom you have the source data and source content. Above that you have you need business logic, right? So that business logic could be about eligibility, about objectives, about rules, about prioritizations, offers, constraints, etc., right? And you have to have that for each of your source content and source data. And then at the top you get execution in a channel, right? And between that you have the orchestration. Now inside one channel you can often do this rather easily because you can control the content, you can control the local rules, the execution environment, and so on. But across channels the layers have to really work together. Now, AI doesn't remove that problem. It makes the local layers easier to automate while increasing the need for coordination above them. Right. So this is where I will make one important distinction between content adaptation and treatment decisions that you need to make. So content adaptation can happen close to the channel, whereas decisions need shared logic and orchestration, as we see in the next slide. So in the next slide, you see there are these 5 boxes. Think of this as the control layer or control plane for making decisions about the treatment or actions you do for people. Right? So what does that mean? It does not have to render every web page or generate every email, but what it does need to do is do things like sequence journeys, resolve offer conflicts, apply eligibility caps and things like that, resolve offer conflicts. I just mentioned that. So manage identity and permission, pass context across different objects, and keep an audit trail of all of that. Now, channels can still execute all of this locally. What we don't want is that every channel should be making its own treatment decisions in isolation. So when AI spreads personalization logic into more tools, something above the tools has to coordinate that treatment, right? So that's what is happening in this slide. And for you to be able to do that, you need something that we call context layer, which is there marked in green, and we will talk about in the next slide. Right. So this orchestration layer works only if it has shared context, right? And that shared context essentially is a lot more than just a prompt text or raw customer data, right? So it includes several things. So think of a typical treatment decision. It needs definitions. So what does this customer action mean? What segment is this? What offer types are you dealing with, right? So those are some of the definitions that you need to define. Those are in the semantic layer. Then it also needs the current state. What is true right now about this customer or about this journey? So that's the state layer. Then it needs policy, right? What are we allowed to do? What are the caps? What are the consent? What are the constraints, and so on. And finally, it needs governance. Who owns these definitions that were defined in semantic layer? Who changes them, and so on. Now, without this shared context, AI tools can sound confident while optimizing against stale or partial reality. We had an example where in a demo, the AI tool recommended Instagram campaigns to a B2B supplier, right, or B2B manufacturer, right? That doesn't make sense. It did that because it did not have the full context or the full reality, right? It only had partial reality, right? So that becomes a problem. So like I said, AI can sound confident, but it is essentially optimizing against stale data, right? So that may mean that it ignores a rule or uses an old eligibility signal or chooses a locally attractive offer that conflicts with the broader relationship. So how do these work together, which is what we'll see in the next slide. How do these AI layers work together? So first is the insights AI. So think of this as an operating loop that you want to implement. So first you have the insights AI, which essentially reads signals and behaviors. Then you have decisioning AI, where it helps you choose or rank treatment options or decisioning options. And then you have the Gen AI, which adapts or assembles the interaction. Now, agentic orchestration sequences the work across systems, reconciles decisions, manage approvals, and keeps the record. So all of this happens in a sort of a flywheel, right? One feeds into the other, and then eventually it comes back, and then it again happens, right? So this loop essentially breaks when context is stale, or maybe a policy drifts, or sometimes local optimizers make decisions independently, right? So we need to protect that, right? Which is where all this context layer and those things become very important that we just talked about. So we talked about the control plane, the context layer, how the three AI layers work together. So how does this become a part of overall personalization stack, right? So this slide shows you a possible division of layer, right? So first you have the local execution, which essentially stays local. So your web, your email service, your commerce, your ads, mobile, all of them render experiences and execute actions. Then you have the orchestration layer, which essentially coordinates the treatment or decisioning, right? You have then AI services. We talked about three AI services: Insight AI senses, Decisioning AI chooses, and then Gen AI generates or adapts content and responses. Now, then you have the context layer or the shared context, which gives these services the same definition, same state, policy, and governance. Uh, Next to the context layer, you have the foundation services. These services handle identity, they handle customer data, they handle the underlying content and assets, they handle measurement, integration, consent, and things like that. The point is not to centralize every micro decision. Instead, what we are saying is that keep treatment logic and governance from dissolving back into channel silos. Right? So how do you do that? You need to be able to plan the stack forward. So back to you, Tony, for taking us through planning the stack forward.
Yeah, thanks, Apoorv. That was a really, really kind of efficient and tight walkthrough. And I think you kind of built to this slide here. And I can imagine some of our viewers right now are going, "Oh shit, looks like a lot of work. This looks really complicated." And I'm not going to soft pedal it that this is really easy to do, because it's not. We have some thoughts that we'll get to about kind of, crawl, walk, run here. I think the one thing that I would say though is that this is all the more reason to take a more omni-channel sort of enterprise approach, because to be successful with AI, and AI really is, AI is going to be driving the future of personalization, AI and agents. To really be successful with AI, you need to do this stuff, right? You need a context layer, you need foundation services, you need multiple AI services. You need some sort of orchestration, if only for compliance and other reasons. So do you want to do each one of these things in like 10 different channels, or do you want to do it once and just execute? So there is underneath this definitely an efficiency story. And we see this sometimes with vendors, or sometimes agencies, or sometimes systems integrators kind of wanting to own the loop themselves, and then they start asking you for more and more data, more and more context, more and more guardrails, and after a while you're doing this stack in 8 different places, and you don't want to do that. So this looks complicated, but there's also an efficiency story here. Okay, so planning the stack forward. There's a lot of good ways to do this. We're gonna talk about what we think is some good steps to take. Just want to point out that if you have any questions or opinions or things you agree with or disagree with, feel free to use the questions tab in the GoToWebinar control panel. We'll definitely have about 5 minutes towards the end to answer whatever questions, or if you want to just chirp in your own opinion or your own experience to share with the many colleagues who are on the line here, feel free to do that as well. Okay, what to start doing now? So I think let's just take things that you can do today that relate to this wonderful stack model that Apoorv put together. And I think that in terms of local execution, this is a big one, and we've been advising our corporate members around this for some time now, and it's taken on a greater urgency, which is to focus investments in these platforms, your edge-facing platforms like your ESP, your MAP, your WCM, your CRM, your loyalty program, e-commerce. Focus your investments on those vendors that can adapt to remote services rather than requiring that you always have the content localized, the data localized, and the logic localized. In other words, you need to insist that your vendors can absorb and ingest in a decoupled way content and data and even logic and orchestration from external platforms that are going to live lower in your stack. And if those vendors don't do that, then they are locking you into the 2010s. Orchestration layer, you want to start thinking about that. What often brings people to this notion of needing an orchestration layer is some of their pilots around agentic AI. And so that may guide you towards the need more generally for this sort of orchestration. In terms of AI services, don't just double down on Gen AI, which is where a lot of people are right now. You want to build some muscle around Insights AI, Decisioning AI, and Gen AI, and for that matter, Agentic AI, those 4 different types, because you're probably going to need all 4 of these to do personalization right. You're going to need all 4 of those to do personalization right. And then shared context, you want to build not rafts, but graphs. And taxonomies. We just had a great podcast episode you can find on our website on this particular topic, why that's so essential to AI. And then foundation services, you can see previous podcasts and webinars we've done on what we call a content warehouse and customer 360. Without those, it's very hard to do AI. So you want to focus more on what we call stack Pilates, which is really building your core and a little bit maybe not spending so much time on the, the guns that are showing outside of your shirt. And the benefit to this, although you will require resources to do this, is that in the long run, you're going to spend less with agencies, potentially a lot less. You may need to spend more with systems integrators, but they're going to be helping you build muscle rather than actually doing the work themselves. So there's a lot more to say there, but this is really some steps to start doing now. You will have many technology choices, including some really interesting build versus buy discussions that we're having with several of our corporate members right now. You always want to test before you buy, always. And so the sorts of things you want to look at in particular are, cross-system capacity, certainly evidence-based activity, very empirical, and then the economics of personalization has always been a huge issue. It's going to be even more of an issue in a world where tokens may or may not be cheaper than they are today. So we wrote the book on this topic. If there's any way that we can help you in your technology decisions in a more test-based process, let us know. We have some interesting observations to offer there. So let's talk about some key takeaways, and then we'll turn to your questions. So AI may finally improve the economics of personalization. And again, the economics have been a real stumbling block for all of us, but it will require a layered architecture. So as Apoorv said, one of the things that really matters here is a shared control plane, and you don't want to build 8 control planes. You want one shared control plane, and same for a governed context layer and treatment logic that lives above a specific channel. You'll need multiple types of AI working together, along with, of course, identity, orchestration, content, authorized customer data, and of course, measurement, which then creates this kind of looping effect. And remember, the value is in the loop, so you want to own the loop. So in that sense, AI and personalization become foundational components in your stack, not channel-specific features. So this then has implications on the technology that you choose. We would be particularly cautious about these kind of suite tools, which have can say, well, we've got AI built into this and AI built into that. That can help potentially with some local feature-based tactics in channel, but you really want a cross-stack decisioning strategy for coherent customer experience. This is a complicated roadmap, but again, it's a single roadmap and not an 8-fold channel-specific roadmap. And we believe it's the only one that's going to actually work. You can challenge us on that, certainly welcome that. But we wouldn't say this if we didn't think we could help you get there. And if we didn't think that there was a roadmap for getting there, and we do believe there's a roadmap, and we've been advising some large enterprises on that roadmap, certainly happy to advise yours. So with that, I'll turn it over to Scott to just talk about next steps, and then we'll have a look at the questions that have come in.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. Really enjoyed the presentation today. As always, educational and insightful from both of you. So did want to mention that if the corporate membership is something you want to explore, get us on your side to help you through these challenging decisions, reach out to us. Be happy to walk you through the details, what that includes, and the type of support that we can provide. Also want to mention we have another webinar coming up again in a couple of weeks. May 12th, we're going to look at the future of web content management. So something that I know is near and dear to Tony's heart, and we'll take you through that session in a couple of weeks. But in the meantime, I do see some questions have come up, so I'll turn things back to you guys for those.
Yeah, so Apoorv, I'm going to give you first, I'm going to read these and then give you first whack at the answer. Some of them are a little complicated here, but that's okay. It's a complicated topic. So James says, I'm thinking about personalization and decisioning. That's right, they go together, personalization decisioning. And I'm wondering if the context layer would also include data representing all the past treatments that a customer received, so that agents can learn what personalization treatments already were served and whether they should be avoided if the treatments did not produce the desired result. Would the context layer contain that info? Apoorv.
Good question, Jens. So answer is yes, absolutely. Right. So the context layer should include treatment history and not just customer attributes. Right. Otherwise, the agent only knows who the customer is, not what the enterprise has already done to them, and that's important, right? But having said that, note that the learning and arbitration actually sit in the arbitration layer. The context layer only provides the memory and evidence.
Yeah, it's a good point. You're distinguishing between the insights that we have about this person and the decisioning about what we're going to do about it, which are two different things, logically and also from a technology standpoint. And I would say, James, the point you're making too is, again, the criticality of this loop. And I think a misunderstanding sometimes that people have that their AI has machine learning services built in, because probably what you'd want in that situation is some sort of propensity model that says, okay, this stuff didn't work before with this person, so we have a better next best action for them, or a better next best experience. And for that, you need real data science. And so there's a critical role for data science in the loop, and the value is always in the loop. Okay, we have time for more questions, folks. Let's see. Sarah is asking Apoorv, what do we mean by build muscle in AI services? Is that literally think through and write use cases?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, partly, right? So build muscle essentially means move from abstract AI ambition to repeatable operating capability, right? So start with the concrete use cases, but just don't stop there. For each one, define the decision, the data, the context needed, the policy constraints, all of the other things, and then over time that gives you reusable muscles, right? So.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, use cases and business strategy and all that are really important. I would say in kind of the neuromuscular aspects here, they're the signals, the electrical signals that tell the muscles what to do. But in terms of building them, that means building capacity over time, which is all the foundational nutrition that you need, and then exercising those muscles and beginning to explore some of those use cases, and being real about what you need to be effective here. Okay, last question from Jessica Apoorv. It's a really good one. It's a simple one, but a good one. Where do agents fit? And we didn't necessarily have specific boxes for agents in the diagrams, but there's definitely work for agents to do. So what is that work?
So here, then I will make a distinction between agents and agentic AI, right? So agentic AI is the whole system that's orchestrating, and agents are components of that, right? So think of agents as being useful for things like orchestration helpers, right? So coordinating tools, or checking policies, assembling context, logging decisions, and so on, right? So that's where you use multiple agents and then orchestrate them using some sort of an agentic layer or a decisioning layer, or or whatever. Right now, now keep in mind that they become very risky when each channel has its own agent making isolated decisions. But that's a part of another discussion or another webinar maybe.
Yeah, we've got some recorded webinars on this particular topic. I say that agents come into play as soon as you start wanting to do things that are cross-channel or even cross-platform. And so, you know, any kind of orchestration that you want to do, and that's usually where the high-value strategic use cases lie, Jessica. So great question. All right, with that, we've reached the bottom of the half hour. Always great to spend some time with you. Feel free to reach out to us at any time with any questions that you have or insights or input at the coordinates you see on the screen. In the meantime, this is Tony Byrne on behalf of my colleagues Apoorv Durga and Scott Dill signing off for now. So long.